okay? So I'm trying to get in myself here. All right. Okay. Good morning. I'd like to welcome everybody to the RegE Remittance Transfer Rule webinar. This is Lynn Ellis with the Bankers Bank of Kentucky. So glad that you took the time this morning to join us, and we hope that you're going to find this very informative. We'll be recording the webinar and posting it out on QNet so that if you miss anything or you have additional staff that would like to view it, we'll be sending an email letting you know when it's out there. For those of you that have joined on voice, telephone, we've asked that you please put your telephone on mute. Don't get any background information in the webinar. At the end of the webinar, we will let you all unmute your lines and ask any questions that you have. We're so pleased to have Bob Dodd, Senior Vice President with Cambridge Mercantile Group, with us today. Penny Webb, Product Manager with Profit Stars, is the vendor that brings QNet that you all use. And I have also Steve Garrett on the phone, and he's also with Profit Stars. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob Dodd, and we welcome you all this morning.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome to the RegE Remittance Transfer Rule webinar. There's going to be three phases of our webinar this morning. First, we will be talking about the Dodd-Frank Section 1073, which we all know as RegE. I'll give you a historical perspective of the reg. I'll give you an overview of the regulation itself. I'll provide you information regarding safe harbor. Details are also part of the legislation. Then we will go over the requirements that are involved with the disclosures. If we're involved with the disclosures, I will actually turn over the webinar back to Penny Webb from Profit Stars, go through QNet and actually go through the demonstration and the actual solution that each of the community banks will be able to utilize using the QNet system. Penny will provide, workflow and show how each of those payments and the workflow actually occurs. And then she will also provide you samples of the disclosure statements that are available within QNet as well. Penny is done. It will pass over to me, and we'll talk about error resolution and the requirements within the legislation related to your customers' ability to for error resolutions and what does that look like, and we'll get into the details around that. We'll finish up all the information regarding the regulation, demo, the disclosures, the error resolution. We'll then open up the phone line. We'll hand it back to Lynn, and we'll get into a Q&A. You will have questions on this, so we certainly look forward to the details of your questions once that come into place. Start with the regulation in general. RegE, or Section 1073 as it's known, is a very small piece of the overall Dodd-Frank legislation that came into law in 2010. Dodd-Frank was initiated financial crisis in the United States in 2008-2009 and really impacts every single aspect of the financial services industry. This just happens to be a very small component. I'm sure many of you are aware of other components that have already impacted your financial institution and requirements that you have to do in other pieces of that legislation. Cambridge, for example, as a foreign exchange company, also has additional items that they are required within Dodd-Frank to now provide out into the marketplace. But we will be specifically talking about consumer remember rule, which is known as RegE. Now, you all see Hawaii on this slide and go, why am I in head here? And no, it's not because the Community Banking Association of America is having their conference there in March. It is because RegE all came about from a congressman from Hawaii who realized that his constituents were sending around the world using transfer such as a Western Union or a MoneyGram, retail type of locations where they would go in and say, I want to send $1,000 to somebody in Mexico. I want to send $500 to my aunt in England. And what he realized, and feedback from his constituents, was we didn't know all the fees that were associated with this. We didn't know what the exchange rates were. So he pushed for legislation, and the legislation that has come to pass is known as RegE. Right? So the whole objective was to RegE and to ensure that consumers were protected around various financial services instruments that were in place. Through the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was established. Framework around RegE. Okay. Well, the initial scope of the framework was to go into February 7th, 2013 of this past year. And such as ourselves and other large financial institutions domestically here in the United States we put back to the CFPB and said the way the legislation was written was really prohibitive of us providing proper information back to the consumer as was described in the existing legislation. There are things such as providing taxes. Certain countries, there are taxes actually lifted out of those payments that come out of that payment. Beneficiary bank fees were also incorporated in the initial round of the legislation. Again, the industry pushed back to the CFPB going, listen, this is unrealistic. Every financial institution around the world receiving money charges different fees. We are really don't have to provide correct information. The information we would provide would be inflated and incorrect and probably to the detriment of the consumer. So the CFPB actually pushed back and said, okay, you know what, we're going to hold off on the February time frame, and we're going to revisit this a little bit. And we're going to look at the legislation, and they came back with what I call a scaled-down version of RegE, right? It has the major requirements that was initially set out for the regulation. So let's talk about the scope, and we'll talk about the things that are in there now. So scope of legislation is consumer-driven. This is consumer electronic payment that goes somewhere outside of the States. It can be a consumer payment going to a consumer. It can be a consumer payment going to a business. As long as that consumer's bank account is held in the United States, that payment now will fall under the requirements under RegE. Beneficiary can be a person or it can be a business, as I mentioned, right? The rule applies to you will see RTP a lot in this presentation. RTP is yourself, the community bank. You are the remittance transfer provider to your consumer or to your customers. So if this is a normal course of business that you are operating in, you are required to this legislation that is now in place. Now, there are certain things, and we'll talk about safe harbor in a little while, where through feedback from the industry, the CFPB came back and said, okay, micropayments and those payments under $15 have to be applied to the RegE and the disclosures and the requirements and the error resolutions. In addition, we do make something that is a one-off payment process for a number of smaller institutions that do not do this as a normal course of business, but would like to offer it out to their customers without basically going, you know what, sorry, the regulation is too prohibitive. We do not want to provide this information. It's too consuming. It won't help us in any shape or form. So they actually came back and said financial institutions that do under 100 international payments for consumers over the course of a year also do not have to be part of the regulation and do not have to comply with this. So there's information that must now be provided to the consumer from the remittance transfer provider. These are really the key requirements that are part of the legislation, and are disclosure information to the consumer before and at the time the payment is executed. In following that payment execution, the consumer has rights around error resolution or the ability to cancel those payments for a full refund. So we talked about a number of these things already. It is a remittance transfer in an electronic format. So if you do foreign bank draft, right, to a consumer and they mail that check overseas, that does not fall into the RegE requirements because a paper-based transaction. So it'd be an electronic payment from a consumer in the United States to a business or an individual in a foreign country. The two products typically are wire transfers in both foreign exchange or U.S. dollars. So it does not matter if it's in foreign exchange or foreign currency or if it's in U.S. dollars. They both are part of the regulation. And also utilizing in-country clearinghouses, or as we know it in the United States as ACH. In Europe, that is a SEPA payment. In Great Britain, it's a BACS payment. In Canada, it's an EFT. It's utilization of those in-country low-value banking systems. Initiating one of those also apply to RegE. As before, the rule applies to almost every single remittance transfer that's done by a consumer. It's under $15, right? Unless that bank account is held outside the United States. So if your consumer is actually located in Paris, but their bank account is based in the United States, that falls to RegE because that is the location of the bank account, not the location of the individual, right? As I mentioned before, this can be a consumer-to-consumer payment or it can be a consumer-to-business payment. Who the beneficiary is does not determine whether this payment falls into RegE or does not fall out of RegE. It is who the originator is or who the receiver is that determines whether the payment falls into RegE. So if it's a consumer or an individual, it is a RegE payment. If it is a business, a nonprofit, an organization, an LC, those payments do not fall under RegE. Key definitions that are part of the legislation. If anyone wants to go and see the legislation and have some great material for when they want to go to bed at night, right? It will put you to sleep quite quickly. You can go to the CFPB's website, and all the PDFs regarding the RegE and the legislation are there. I did mention already the RTP, the remittance transfer provider, and that is the person or the organization that, as a normal course of business, are creating payments for consumers, and those accounts are held with individuals. The sender is the consumer, right, who is initiating the payment, and you know, it's a personal transaction. Right? And there's a number of key definitions. I won't go into each one of those, but as I start getting into disclosures, the things that are required on the disclosure, and also the error resolution requirements, you will see a number of these terminology used. There are safe harbor requirements, or as I should say, there are safe harbor exceptions that have been built into the legislation. And as I mentioned before, this is the difference between the legislation that was originally going to come out in February of 2013 to the legislation that will be going into effect on October 28th next month. One has to do with, in the normal course of business, your institution in this case initiates fewer than 100 international payments in the course of the year, you are not required to provide disclosures or error resolutions. Therefore, you do not have to comply to Regulation E. However, I will talk about some of the requirements that they have added in legislation, and part of that is on a quarterly basis, all your institutions have to do call reports back to the FDIC. And part of those call reports now require you to tell the FDIC how many individual consumer-related payments you have done each quarter. And over a one-year period of time, if you've gone from making 80 payments and being within a safe harbor environment to say your volume has increased and you now do 105 over a yearly time frame, the FPV will give that institution 6 months to implement and put in the policies and procedures required to comply with Regulation E, and they must then be providing disclosures and error resolutions to their customer base. The safe harbor requirement, or I should say the other safe harbor exception that is provided within the legislation, that the CB has determined that following countries are areas that have exceptions to disclosures that provided to the consumer. And they have determined that Aruba, Brazil, China, Ethiopia, and Libya can provide accurate information when initiating payments to those countries. So if you are initiating a payment in U.S. dollars to China or a payment in Chinese renminbi to China, you have to give disclosure and you do not have to comply to the error resolutions that are associated with it. So, and this was back from history going, hey, there's certain countries here that, you know, we give accurate information and we're going to inflate the information we are providing to the consumer in order to comply with the regulation. So this list came out before the February 7th deadline. It has not expanded since that point. And I would not anticipate, unless there is dramatic feedback from the industry that they're finding additional countries difficult to provide this information, will be to the list. So, talk about what really is the guts of RegE. And the main guts around RegE is that you need to disclose both before a payment is initiated to a consumer the following items. And the first is the amount the beneficiary will receive in local currency and U.S. dollar equivalent. Therefore, you have an exchange rate to be provided, and also the amount of fees that will be deducted from that payment. As a normal course of business to help our community bank partners comply with RegE, Cambridge Mercantile will be absorbing all correspondent bank fees. So therefore, we're comfortable that no lifting fees will occur until it's received by the beneficiary bank. So you must provide those 3 pieces of information to the consumer prior to them saying, yes, let's go ahead and do the payment. Have said that, you then do the transaction, finish the transaction, and provide that same information after, provided before, plus the following. You must show on the receipt that the same items that were disclosed, the amount received in local currency or the amount received in U.S. dollars, the equivalent in U.S. dollars, a foreign exchange rate. If it's a U.S. dollar, the rate will be 1. The fees. You must show the recipient's name and if provided. And because on consumer-related payments, the recipient's address is always captured, it will always be provided. In instances, you also must provide the phone number when going to certain currencies, and if that's there, that will also be provided. You must show the remittance transfer provider information. That is your individual credit union's name, address, website, and phone number. Show the delay date, so the expected delay date for the payment to be received by the beneficiary bank. Excuse me. On that disclosure, that is your final disclosure. You also will provide rights error resolution. And with this error resolution, it is the consumer's ability to cancel that transaction within 30 minutes, time that payment was initiated, and 2, that they have 180 days out of resolution to come back to the remittance transfer provider, which is you, the community bank, to say something didn't happen correctly. And when I get into the error resolution component, I'll explain what those things could be. All right? So it will have the CFPB address on there, website, phone number, and it will also have your state or federally regulated agency on there. So if you are state regulated, right, it will have your state regulator on there, and if you are federally regulated institution, it will have the federal regulator closure as well. What format does this receipt need to have, or is known as the disclosure, right? It has to be in a form that the sender can keep, right? It has to be able to be printed, turned into a PDF, emailed, handed to them, right? It must be clear and concise with the information that is both on the prepayment and on the final disclosure. And it also must be provided in the language that you provide as a principal language that you provide out to your customer base. So if you actually happen to say be in Florida or Texas and you are providing literature and statements and other details in Spanish, you also must provide disclosures in Spanish as well. So I'm going to hand it over to who go through QNet and provide the information to you. So I need to assign and make presenter Penny.
Thank you, Bob, and I'm going to share my desktop. See the quick dashboard? Okay. Oh, thank you, Bob, and hello, everyone. In this portion of the demo, I'm going to review the changes we've made to the QNet product in the support of the Dodd-Frank RegE updates. Even though there are opt-out guidelines, as Bob mentioned, all international wire transactions will be treated the same within the QNet application. This will allow you to make appropriate workflow decisions, but have all the pertinent data for whichever direction you go. I will note in here that because the QNet solution does not allow the origination of IET, ACH transactions, we only focused on international wire transaction types for this update. I'll point out one thing before we move into creation of a new wire transaction. We did the application in a way that will allow you, the respondent banks, to add your own fees to the automated process. We added a new international wire fee field to the application to store whatever fees are assessed by your institution individually. So to access this page, you would go to the App Management menu and Security, and there is the international fee information. You can update that. We'll make it $5 and save. And note that this is not a required, just if you want to assess your own fees. And this, like I said, your fee. It will be added to any fee that would be assessed by Cambridge or the correspondent bank. Those would be added together as the total fees for the transaction. And this fee will be added to every international wire transaction entered by any user associated with your individual respondent. I'll point out here as we go through the process of adding the new wire, you would actually see this additional fee. I will also note on here that anyone can change this international wire fee at any time that has access to this security information page. Okay, now that we've entered the wire, or entered the fee, we will a new international wire transaction. So to do so, we would follow the same path that you would use today to create any message. So we'll click on the Message Manager, Outgoing. This is your outgoing manager page. We would click Action, Create Message, and select the International Wire Transfer option. Okay, so here is our international wire form. We've updated this first section here to include the new updates for the RegE updates. This other information about the originator, intermediate, and beneficiary information has not changed at all. Notice that we have this transfer fee section, we have a total to recipient section, and we have exchange rate information here. The transaction fee field will include any fees and Cambridge or correspondent fees in addition to the international wire fees that we just updated. So this is where you would see that combined total fee. You have the option here to create international wire messages in US to dollar or US to foreign currency or foreign currency to US. The fields in this area here will change, like the requirements and the field details will change based on what selection you choose here.
So you do the foreign currency for the code.
Yes. Choose US to US dollars. You would notice that the foreign currency code field is blank because that's not applicable. If you do US to foreign currency, you would obviously have the option to choose a currency. Pick one. When you pick the currency, then we would pull the exchange rate for that particular currency. And once we add a dollar amount in here, this is the funding amount where the customer is telling us that they want to send $500 US to the destination currency and whatever that exchange rate would be. So this would be receiving amount then would be altered to show what we're actually sending to the user, to the beneficiary. If we were to choose the foreign currency to U.S., what this is, you'll notice now the funding amount is not editable, and the receiving transfer amount is. And what that's saying is you would use this option if you wanted to make sure that your beneficiary in Belgium actually gets, you could see $500. I would actually see that would mean that you would need to give, give your correspondent bank the $646 as the funding amount to that 500 euros is actually reaches destination. Now, I want to note here, a couple of things I want to note here is currently you have to enter a asterisk in the fund field if your destination currency is a foreign currency. Going forward, it will no longer have to do that. We will do that for you based on the selection of the currency exchange option displayed here. So you'll no longer need to do that. Also, we have a path in here if for some reason you select a currency, your destination currency is something that is not contained in the rate file we're pulling from, we're giving you a path with directions on how to handle that situation. So basically you would need to your correspondent, they would then talk with RegE and come up with a rate that needs to be applied to this transaction, and you would enter that rate within this field. We save that. With that, it made the necessary changes to the rate file. If for some reason you miskeyed that, you can get back to that page from the set rate page here. So we want to do that. Click Set, and that alters the information that is displayed there.
And Penny, we will do, what Bankers Bank will do is we'll actually send the respondent bank an email.
Okay.
That rate, so we have documentation to enter into that rate.
Very good. So that's the basic functionality of this top portion here, how you could use that. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to create a transaction based on a template that I added yesterday, so that y'all don't have to watch me type the originator bank intermediary information while we're looking at that. So I'm going to select the international wire one that I did yesterday. You'll also be able to use the lookup function for these. So, same functionality you have today on these, those things make it easier than typing all of this stuff in if it's something that you do often. As you see here, we've added this message type is actually for a U.S. dollar to foreign currency, and we're sending this to Belgium, which has euros. We've got the estimated exchange rate value and the funding amount. We've also added a little disclaimer here that just note to the person talking to the customer that this total to recipient is this is with information that we know today. There's obviously that amount could be reduced by any intermediate or beneficiary fee taxes. We're going to save this transaction, and that'll take us to the outgoing manager page. So the transaction that I just entered, and as you can see, we have OFAC screening turned on. So we need to review that information and, if appropriate, release the transaction. It's pinned, so I'm going to refresh. Now that it failed screening. So I'm going to look at that, and obviously this is not the information that applies to my customer that I've entered this information for, so I'm just going to add a comment. That wire. So you notice that happen there quickly. Now we'll generate the prepayment report for this message. So just as you would today, you would click the message, and we'll click Action, Print Selected Message. Okay, and now that prepayment disclosure has been sent to the report manager. So I'm going to go to the report manager. And here's the report that I just generated. So this is your prepayment disclosure, and you'll note here we have a printed date. That's the time that we initiated the transaction and have requested print. And we also have a disclaimer on here that says this form is not a receipt. At this point, as I said, this is the prepayment disclosure, so no money has transferred hands at this point. We also have the information that we just reviewed on the message creation. That's the details about the transaction. We have the same disclosure here that says that this recipient amount may not be what the end user or the end beneficiary actually gets. Added text in here, as Bob mentioned earlier, the customer has a 30-minute cancellation window from the time that you do this transaction with your customer. You can use this form to have that conversation with your customer, but that will be a manual process outside of this, side of the QNet solution. Lynn, do you want to add anything there about best practices following this part of the process? Okay.
You all will be able to do, and what you'll have to make a decision on if the RegE applies to your financial institution, because 30-minute cancellation window is process, and it begins from the time that you speak or initiate that transaction with the originator. You could either time that transaction occurs in your bank or your teller line or your online banking system, or for simplicity's sake, what we did with QNet is we dated the date and the time for you so that the 30-minute window could begin from that printed time. So that you had to look at, you could actually circle the date and time, have initials on this receipt, on the print disclosure, and give to your customer. So we've given you the ability to use QNet for that clock to begin. However, there's no way for the QNet system to count down that 30-minute window for you, but this gives you a starting point. We can discuss that in more detail during Q&A if you'd like to.
Great. And like Lynn saying, we have the ability to log specific times, but we don't have a way to indicate when you actually had that conversation with the customer, and that's really when your 30-minute window starts. So that's where, it's a good idea to use the date that you have available to you. So once that 30-minute window has expired, you will need to follow your current authorization procedures to complete the transaction. Once you've done that, the transaction will then be processed by Bankers Bank and Cambridge, and then once complete, an updated written receipt that will be delivered to QNet's report manager as it does today. So you get this same receipt today. We've just updated it with the additional fields suggested by the CFPB. Here is a copy of the receipt a sample of the receipt that you would receive, and contains all your prepayment information that we discussed earlier. You've got your exchange rate here. I have like the confirmation code of the day funds would be available, your sender, recipient, and pickup location information, and your bank information. They also have disclosure information here at the bottom, and that includes the fund disclosures and also your error resolution. At this point, then, I will turn this back over to Bob and let him further discuss the error resolution process.
Okay, see where it says
Okay.
data available? Should it be date
Yes.
available? Okay.
Yes, it should be. Thank you. We'll fix that. I heard that yesterday before. Let me find Bob. And back to you.
Thank you, Penny. Okay. Let's talk about error resolution and your consumers' rights they have. So I put it into 4 different categories. First one is error procedures, error types, error remedies, and then we'll go back to the receipt. So you just saw the receipt that comes out of QNET, and you saw where your consumer has the right to cancel that transaction 30 minutes after the time that is located on that disclosure statement that was generated out of QNET. Excuse me. If they cancel within that 30-minute time frame, transfer provider, or in this case the community bank, must refund the full amount plus any fees that you collected. So if you did charge, $40, like, the example was shown there, you must provide the full fee back to your customer and also the full amount that you collected from them on that. Must do so within 3 business days at no extra cost to the consumer. Cancellation requests are ineffective if the receipt has been, if the recipient has picked up the funds. So for some reason that payment's gone out there and they tried to cancel it. Now, I don't know any institution that is releasing funds prior to the 30-minute window expiring. We certainly are not. All right? Let's go back to error procedures. All right? So we talked about 30-minute window, and that was their first kind of right of resolution, that they have the ability to cancel. Second, they have the ability, the consumer has the ability to come back within 180 days and notify you, the community bank, that there's a problem, right? And then you, the community bank, have 90 days from the receipt of that notice to actually investigate that. And then once the error has been determined in any way, shape, or form, you then have 1 business day, or as reasonably practical, to error and in essence, right? So error types that actually come into play. Is an incorrect amount paid by the sender. The example here would be on the QNET receipt, it shows a $40 fee, and they got charged $45. And that is you, the remittance transfer provider, have overcharged your consumer in some way, shape, or form. I actually see this as the least likely error type that will occur. The error will be the incorrect amount was received by the beneficiary. So you have disclosed on the disclosure statement the amount of funds, right, that the beneficiary will receive, right? Now, they can go, well, you said they're going to get 500 euros and they only got 495 euros, right? If they come in and fill out an error resolution form and you pass it on to Bankers Bank Kentucky, Bankers Bank Kentucky gets it to Cambridge, and we go through our investigation of the process, and we determined, well, that $5 fee was actually a beneficiary bank fee, right? And that's not part of the legislation. That is no longer something that we need to disclose, and that's not something that provides the ability to get a resolution on. However, if that fee was taken out prior to the payment being received by the beneficiary bank, then yes, indeed, the consumer has the ability to come back and ask for a resolution. And then the third type would be funds are not received on the published availability date. So, again, on the QNet disclosure, it provides the date the funds will be available to the beneficiary. And on the date, it said on September 25th. So let's say the funds were not available until 7th. Consumer has the ability to come back to the community bank and look for a restitution, right? And really, those are the remedies that I'll then talk about. But before we get into the remedies that actually occur, right, and what you need to do as a remittance transfer provider, I want to talk about the published availability dates. Public availability dates have a kind of win in there where if for a compliance reason, those are delayed, or if there is missing information regarding that payment, your consumer does not have the ability to come back to you, the community bank, and for an error resolution. So, an example. Example would be that an individual has initiated a payment. You say it's going to go September 25th, and the correspondent bank that we're utilizing can go, I need more information regarding this payment, right? I need to know reason for the payment because for some reason it's been flagged within their compliance queue as requiring additional information. The consumer will not have the ability to come back and do an error resolution, whether it's an OFAC hit, whether it's a correspondent bank asking for additional information, and certainly if they're seeing bank information, wrong account number, and so forth. So what are the remedies, right? So if one of these error types happen, right, I charged my consumer, the incorrect amount got to the beneficiary, or it did not get there within the time frame that has been stated on the disclosure. You, the community bank, must refund, right, of that payment. And if an incorrect amount was sent or received, you must send the difference or refund the difference. So charged $40 and the actual payment did not get there until the 27th, you need to refund the fee. If it got there and it was less than what it was supposed to receive by the beneficiary, right? You must get refunded the difference and also get refunded the fee. So either send the difference or get refunded the difference and also get back the fee. And those are real remedies behind that. I have 180 days in order to act to you. Use 90 days to investigate. Once that investigation is completed, you have 1 business day to conclude and provide that information or fix and provide that remedy to your consumer. So error resolutions triggered, right? Talked about all the information and what obligations are regarding investigating these errors, right? Again, you must receive it within 180 days from the disclosure date of the transfer, right? Have given enough information to identify who the sender was, their contact information, the remitter's name, and the issue. So this is the information that you actually need to collect, right? Indicate why the sender believes that an error has occurred, right? So these are your investigation obligations. So this is what you need to do as a community bank and the information you need to collect regarding error resolution. I will do a form in just a little while that the Bankers Bank Kentucky has put together, right? And that is known within regulation as the short form, right? Their disclosures are kind of the short form. The error resolution form that you will see is the short form. Now, there's a long form, right? It's using the long form. But you are required, right, by law as part of your policies and procedures, to have that long form on file, right? So whenever asks you for the long form, you can actually give it to them. So I recommend you Google RegE error resolution form. It will take you right to the CFPB, and Mike having a copy of the full regulation on file. You also see all the error resolution forms in their standard formats, and it literally lists out about 12 different PDFs regarding this legislation. I recommend you bind it up, you call it RegE, you stick it on the shelf, and you got your policies and procedures in place. Talk about that error resolution form. So it's an example of what Bankers Bank Kentucky will provide to you, the community bank, in order to get the information they need so that not only Bankers Bank Kentucky, but Cambridge can do their due diligence around the error resolution. Right? First, the contact information is provided on it, and really the contact information is, this is Bankers Bank Kentucky, so you need to complete one that you have for your customers. Right? Basically needs to have your name, address, email addresses, and contact details on there. What information do you then need to get? Right? You need to get your, right? So who the community bank is, who the individual at the community bank is, and your phone number at the community bank. So in this case, Bankers Bank Kentucky knows who to get back to. Right? The date and the time of the international wire transfer, right? So within the disclosure statement, you have a time stamp on there, and you also have a deal number on there. I ran all that information is captured and given back to Bankers Bank Kentucky. The dollar amount of the transfer. So how much was it in U.S. dollars? Provide information, give all the details you can, and say what is the problem, right? What do you think an error has occurred and what you believe that to be. Then provide it back to Bankers Bank Kentucky. They work with Cambridge to investigate that, and we will get back in 90 days and provide you with the findings that have occurred. And the findings will either be, no, an error has not